Yo, welcome back, everybody. This is part three of our documentary dig into the dark beginnings of transgenderism. Myself and the Hudsman here have been doing a little bit of digging and finding some very unflattering truths about the beginning of transgenderism. So, Huds, do you want to give us a recap from what we've gone over the past 2 days?
For sure. Yeah, so we began on day one talking about Dr. John Money, who what he did is there was a pair of twin boys, and he wanted to find out, okay, if we raise somebody as a woman, then they will be a woman. And in order to do so, he had these twin boys. There was a botched circumcision. From that botched circumcision, he decided, all right, this guy Bruce is now going to be Brenda. So then he worked with Brian and Bruce as they got older, did a lot of really weird stuff like showing them pornography, having them simulate sex with one another, and then even on one occasion taking photos of them, and or I may have already said that, but doing regular genital inspections of them. It was a lot of really weird pedophilia style shit. And so that was allowed to go on for a while. And for a long time, he kept saying the experiment was successful. It was successful. It was successful. And it became the basis for gender theory today. And it wasn't until after it became the basis for gender theory that it was found out everything that he did with these children. And then these children, as they grew up, both of them ended up killing themselves. Brian ended up ODing on medication. And then David, who was Brenda, who was originally Bruce, ended up shooting himself in the face with a shotgun. Really, really horrific stuff.
So we came to the conclusion that the science that led to transgenderism was founded on a flawed project. Basically, Brenda or David, right? The Dr. Money who started this entire thing really established this whole being able to transfer genders. Basically, the surgeries was based on a flawed foundation.
Yeah.
The science wasn't factual. The science was flawed. It was not true, but he still pushed the narrative that, he was right.
Yeah. And he kept pushing it. And then it wasn't until after it was accepted that things
it wasn't until after it was widely accepted, or it was officially accepted.
Yeah, because the whole thing was they were looking at intersex. So when you deal with somebody who's intersex, who more like a hermaphrodite, like they may have both organs, they had surgeries that they could do. And he made it so that you could do these surgeries even if somebody wasn't intersex. So it caused a whole mess of things that went on. And that was just day one of us talking about this.
And then day two, we kind of went into what who inspired Dr. Money first, right? Where did he get the idea of this whole theory and this possibility of even changing genders? And we fell upon Dr. what's his name?
Alfred Kinsey.
And we found out that this Dr. Kinsey is a pedophile himself, who encourages and hung out with pedophiles and told them to keep on pedophiling kids, for his little science experiment. And that he also had ties to the Nazis, correct?
Correct. And it was just disgusting. With him, it was he would touch kids as young as 5 months old.
And what was some of the tests they were doing? What was the test that they were doing?
The test that they were doing is they were trying to bring these children up to pre-adolescence to orgasm, and then he was timing it.
As young as how old?
5 months.
Sick
Unbelievable.
fucker. That's a sick
Yeah.
fucker.
And that was where Money's research came from. And then even from him, there was the other guy, Foucault, who was French. So this goes all the way back until, the late 1800s. And instead of like looking at this with, the logical eye, we just let this go on, and it's now just accepted fact. And that's what's so disgusting about it. And so we started initially with looking at money, and then we went back in time to the foundation. And now what we're going to do today is we're going to look forward to some of the laws that we have in place, specifically on some consent
I
laws.
wouldn't say necessarily forward, it's more present.
Present, you're right.
Present time.
But
Because
if you look, I just meant like the timeline, we're starting in the middle, back, forward. But you're right, present time. What are we dealing with in present time?
and we found out that like really the LGBTQ foundation is based off of gender theory or queer theory, right? Which is also derived from all this John Money, Kensley, that whole debacle. Like, and it's also Marxism. We found that it has roots in Marxism. That it's a component of Marxism. Just like feminism is a component of Marxism, Marxism is a component of Marxism, and this gender theory is also rooted in that too.
Yeah.
So overall, like, it's a breakdown or a means of destruction of traditional norms, in essence.
Yeah. Break down the traditional norms, and that everybody should be viewed as equal. So if I am 1% of the population, well, yeah, I mean, even hell, like some of the things that we were finding, they were even saying in queer theory that if you are a pedophile, it's like okay, it's like not your fault. And then they're even putting it in the DSM-5, right?
They decriminalize it. They decriminalize it and say that they're trying to make it to where it's just considered you're normal. That like you having the desire to touch children is normal.
Well, it's just not your fault. It's a mental illness.
Well, they're not even trying to label it that. They're trying to it's like the idea of the thought of wanting to touch children or the desire wanting to touch children. It's not bad. Just the action is.
Yeah, just don't do it, and then everything's okay. Like what?
Yeah.
What are we talking about, people?
Yeah, makes no sense. So today we're going to be diving into some states that we found to have some really horrible laws when it comes to protecting children. And I don't know how many times we hear like reporters or congresswomen always talk about, we're doing this for the kids. We got to protect the kids. We got to protect the children. But do they really though? Like, do they really care about protecting the kids? Because I don't know if they do. Not after everything we read.
I really don't think they are either. I was pretty surprised by this, and we're only looking at 2 states here. We're looking at Pennsylvania, where I am, and then looking at California.
Where I am.
Yeah. And
so let's get into it.
Crazy.
Let's start with PA.
Absolutely.
What you got going on in PA? Pussy Alley.
Get out of here. So the age of consent in Pennsylvania, and I was literally talking to my girlfriend the other day about this, and I had said to her that I know the age of consent is 16. I've always known that. And she was like, no, it's not. It's 18. And I was like, are you serious? You don't actually know the laws here? Turns out that the law of consent in Pennsylvania is 16. I was right on that. So as long as somebody is 16 years old, they can legally consent to sexual activity. You know how we've got those apps and whatnot out there, like Tinder and Hinge and Bumble, and you got to be like 18 to be a part of it? Well, in PA, technically, I can have sex with a 16-year-old and nothing is wrong with it. That blew my mind. Because I always thought it was a 4-year rule.
Yeah,
But
there's not a 4-year clause in PA.
there is, but it's a little bit different.
What do
It
you mean?
builds. So the 4-year clause in PA is that no one less than 13 years old can consent. So if you're 13
Mm-hmm.
and somebody is, I guess it's like 16.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's more like 3. They got to keep tight to certain things. So as long as it's 13 and 16, that's okay.
So you're saying statutory rape is only considered for those under the age 16, between 16 and 13.
Correct.
That's where only the 4-year law actually is permitted.
The 4-year law, it's meant to protect people when
Under
they are,
16.
yeah, when they're under 16. So like 13 and 16-year-olds can sleep together, 14 and 17-year-olds, 15 and 18-year-olds. And then once you hit 16, it's free game.
Like you can sleep with whoever you want.
Yeah. So like you can let this stuff go on even if somebody is as young as 13 years old. 13 years old is when it starts.
What doesn't make sense to me is like if you are going to allow 16-year-olds to engage in sex, why don't you just make them adults at 16? Because what for the next 2 years, they're still under their parents, guardianship legally.
Yep.
So that make the grandparent or the parents, now grandparents, legally responsible for the minor child that's under the parent's custody, which is a minor child who is still under the parent's custody.
Until the main child, so not the grandchild, but until the main child becomes 18, yes.
That is shitty for the parents.
Oh, dude, I saw some of these high school pregnancies. It's absolutely wild. I just don't get, like, as you had said before when we were talking about age, they like you can take place in this and not even be of age to have a vote whether this is what you want or not.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it just blew my mind. And I had to refresh myself because I thought it was the 4-year clause. As I swore this is how it used to be, that it was 16 was the age of consent, but 18 was like the firm date. So that if you were 16, you could sleep with somebody up till 20. And then if you were 21 sleeping with a 16-year-old, that's when it becomes statutory rape. But then once 18 hits, then it's fair.
Yeah,
That's what
because
I
it was
thought
called
our
the
4-year
Romeo.
was.
It was called the Romeo and Juliet law, from what I understand. Is when let's say the boyfriend was 18 years old, and because there was cases where the boyfriend would be 18 years old and he gets caught fucking the 17-year-old minor, and the charges would be pressed on him. But they've been dating since they were both younger. Just the fact that he's a year older, now he has to be registered as a sex offender and ruined his life. So they're like, okay, we needed to give some room there. But now there seems like they're just getting rid of, you know, statutory rape to a degree altogether, as long as they're over 13. Ooh.
Yeah, they're literally getting lower and lower and lower in age.
And that's just in Pennsylvania. There's other states that are way low. Like there is no minimum age, basically, right?
And that's one of the things we're going to hop into with California, because I think I blew your mind a little bit when I was diving into it.
Yeah.
So let's move on over to what do they call you guys? Are you guys the sunshine state, or is that
We're the Golden
Florida?
State.
Golden State. All right. So heading over to the Golden State. So is there any, so just to preface, the age of consent in California is 18. However, when it comes to exceptions where a minor can have sexual relations with an adult, there is one exception where a minor can have sexual intercourse with an adult. This is when the two parties are married. So first off, you have to be married. Okay. So there are 3 things that must be necessary. It's consensual sex. So both parties agree to it. Only one or more has to be below 18. And then they're married. So theoretically, and we're going to get into this in the next story, but theoretically, if the parents, and that's what is explained here, it's one of the few states that does not have a minimum age for marriage. Okay. If a minor decides to marry, that person must obtain parental consent and a court order prior to the marriage. So essentially, the parents just need to give the it's okay.
Mhm.
So theoretically, you could pay somebody off, pay a family, and you could marry their daughter, and then you can have sex with her, whatever age that may be.
Yeah.
I mean, hell, the
Theoretically.
example I used with you, you could literally do this with like a 3-year-old, and let's say you're paying them off. Sometimes, people are shitty. Sometimes the parents would give away their child for $1 million if they could.
Yeah. Yep. It's disgusting.
This
It's
just blew my
fucking
mind,
disgusting.
man, that there's literally no minimum age for marriage, and you can bypass the law to have sex with minors over it.
It's downright disgusting.
I just don't understand. Like, I know we've talked like Hollywood and stuff. Like, there's crazy things that went on. We had Epstein a few years back in the news and all that crazy stuff. But the fact that legally there's ways around it blows my mind. There should be no way around it.
It makes you wonder, why haven't they just make a blanket law saying like, no, any sex involving a minor is ultimately prison time? Like, why these loopholes? Like, what's with the loopholes? Like, you know what I mean? Like, why don't we just make it across the federal? Like, why don't we just federalize it? Like, why does it have to be state by state laws? Why can't like all the states just realize like, hey, this shit is bad, we shouldn't do this to kids, and it fucks it up, so we're just going to blanketly make it a federal law? We have federal laws that supersede state laws. Why don't we just do that?
Personally, I think the blanket law, and I don't understand why this is so difficult for everybody to like comprehend, apparently. It should just be 18 with a 2-year rule on it. So if you are 17 dating a 15-year-old, but then you turn 18 and they're 16, probably not. Like something like that. Or there has to be like certain restrictions on it. That's why the 4-year.
How about they just make it to where minors are allowed to fuck minors and adults could only fuck adults?
I know that's what I'm saying, but in the case that you kind of were saying where, you're
No, you
both
just don't let them
17.
date. Like, okay, look, sorry, you got to wait like 2 years until she turns 18, buddy, or you got to wait a year until she turns 18.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
How bad do you really want to date her? No, I mean, honestly, like, practice
Yeah.
abstinence,
Yeah, no, for
no marriage,
sure.
or no sex before marriage.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely things we need to look at, but I don't know. This just blew my mind at how lax the rules actually are, even in our 2 states. I know we live in both blue states, but still, like, it just doesn't vibe with me.
Oh
And
no,
so,
I don't know who it vibes with, except for Michael Jackson
and Epstein.
and R. Kelly.
Yeah.
Think about it, if R. Kelly
R.
was in like California or some other,
He was doing that, wasn't he? He was
Yeah.
marrying the girls.
he had a little sex harem.
Yeah, and he was convincing the girls, like the parents, to let them like marry
I
him.
mean,
At
he
least
did
I
that
believe.
with the singer Aaliyah. He married Aaliyah
Yeah.
when she was a minor.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, why didn't he just do that in California? He would have been fine.
Oh man. That is actually like so weird to think about. You're right. But anyways, it bleeds into these situations like this one here. So this is from PA. Now, this guy did get arrested for it. And this is right around the corner from me. And so like that's why I thought it was like an interesting one to share. So this guy Kaplan.
It looks like, hold on, when did this happen? It looks like it says 2017. Is that right?
2017, yeah.
Wow. So this is somewhat recent. This is almost 5 years ago. This is just 5 years ago.
Yep.
Wow.
So essentially the title here. Lee Kaplan, who fathered kids with Amish teen, gets 30 to 87 years in prison. Now let's read this story. What is this story about? So Bucks County man was sentenced 30 to 87 years in state prison Wednesday on multiple accounts of child rape and related charges for years of housing and sleeping with underage Amish sisters. Okay, where did these girls come from? So he was convicted on June 17 accounts. Last year, police found 9 daughters of Daniel and Sevilla Stolfus inside Kaplan's house. Sevilla Stolfus was also living with Kaplan and the girls. So essentially, with Kaplan here, he was working with this family, Daniel and Sevilla was even living there to essentially have his own ancestral family within his home. So 2 other young girls were also in the house. They were fathered by Kaplan, a Cheltenham native, again around the corner from me, with the oldest of the Stolfus daughters. She was 14 when her parents gifted the daughters to Kaplan.
Wait. Somebody just, here, you can have my daughter. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Like, I don't know if there was any money changed hands or anything like that. However, gifting the daughters, if this situation occurred in California, it would be legal because the parents signed off on the union between this man and their daughter.
Well, they would still need a court order, correct?
Yeah, but at the age of 14, he's probably old enough that it wouldn't be too difficult because it just needs to be like the parental consent and they'd have to have a reasoning. That's what I'm trying to explain. It's like, I don't know how many of these go on in California, but as long as the parents want it, I mean, they're the legal guardians. They can go ahead and make that decision. Because clearly in the California law, it does not state a minimum. There is no minimum age for marriage. So as long as they say, no, this is really what we want, and that's what she wants, and that's what he wants, I don't see them pushing back on it.
Yeah, they could literally marry a 3-year-old if they wanted to.
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And that's what I just find interesting with, we've got people like this out there, obviously. And depending on how the laws are set up, you can get away with it. Obviously it didn't work here in PA because our laws do not accept that. But technically this story fits the narrative and could be acceptable by law in California. Why are we focusing so much on other problems, other laws, and not these basic ones that protect our children?
No clue. No clue. I mean, I have no idea why. I can't even think of a legitimate reasoning. Why? Like, what could be a possible legitimate scenario where, like, they wouldn't protect children? Like, I can't even think of a rational idea. Not one.
And it goes back to what we talked about before with, because we're all talking about the dark history of transgenderism. All of these basis, like all these studies that were the basis of all of this, you can see the issues with it. I mean, we were talking at some point about how, they're coming into schools and like showing kids dildos and butt plugs and things like that when these
you
are
got the transgender
dildos.
fairy story time.
Yeah, like we are pushing this stuff on these children, and if you're not on board, then you're transphobic.
Yeah.
So like what we're gonna get to a point where it's like, if you're not down with this, you're pedophiliophic or something. Like, I just don't understand where it ends and why this isn't like a focus. Like if you look at the history, you see all the pain and abuse that went on.
Well, they're going to
So
make it to where pedophilia is like you cannot protect your kids against another person wanting to molest your kids. Pretty much.
I
Like
mean, that's the direction that they're pushing. And
what protections, what if we don't have protections or laws in place that protect kids from being abused, what can parents do? So what are we supposed to do? Just go out and shoot the motherfucker that, you know, touches our kid?
you can't do anything because technically they're not breaking the law.
No, they'll charge you for murder, but or they'll charge you for murder and they'll get off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Sick
just
world we live in. It's a sick fucking world.
I just have to say, like, I'm so glad that we are able to talk about some of these things because people need to understand them. This is the world that you live in. And if you don't, or if you're not aware of this, then, you know, shit happens. I'll
It's
tell you what, like, I
also
don't want anything happening to my kids.
well, it's also not just the world that we live in. These are groups and movements of people that people support, and they don't necessarily know all the ins and outs of the history that these groups are founded on. Maybe if people knew what these like movements and these groups are, their foundation comes from, maybe they wouldn't get as much support as they have now. And maybe that's a good thing. You know, I'm not trying to say one group's bad or worse than the other, but I'm just saying like knowing where the roots are, where it comes from, really might determine whether or not you want to be supportive of that group. Because knowing the history and where it's been, you kind of could get an idea where it's planning on going.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And like, as we're seeing with kind of how the laws are formed, the laws are going to continue to form in this direction unless people kind of wake up to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you recommend? What is a good remedy of this?
I think the best remedy is to be educated. I know we had said before, don't take anything that we say as 100% fact, even though we're, you know, pulling up the data for you. We also still are giving a small interpretation. Do your own research on it. Understand what's actually going on. Understand where all these things came from. I'm not saying that you as an adult should not be allowed to be transgender or make your own decisions. I think you absolutely 100% should. Once you become an adult, I think you're allowed to choose to do whatever you want to do. But by doing the research yourself and coming up with your own conclusions, you can also shape the future of the world. I'll tell you what, with some of these laws, I don't want to live in certain states, or I don't want to be around certain people just for the protection of my children.
Yeah.
And if we're not paying attention to that, I think we're doing a great disservice to our children. And if we don't do it, history is always bound to repeat itself.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, one, knowing about these laws or knowing about where the foundation is of these groups should really put the microscope in questioning the legitimacy of these groups and their theories. I think that should be definitely scrutinized, you know, and definitely looked at and figured out have they changed the course of action from the beginning? Has there been a ramification within that like where they have decided that they're not going to be a part of where, you know, the foundation anymore? You know, because I mean, the way that they're grooming kids, it kind of seems like there still are part of that whole push for children, you know, so like Disney might be involved in it. Who knows? I mean, I'm just speculating because, you know, the whole grooming thing that came out with them, it's like the attack on children is obvious. So we need to first protect our kids. I mean, if your kid grows up to be transgender, then that's fine. That's your kid's choice, but they get to make that decision at 18. There shouldn't be an incentive or a movement to push them to go one way or the other. Period. And two, I think like you said, people need to do their own research. Don't take what we say for credit. Shit, I tell you guys, never take what we say for credit all the time. Look into it yourself. Do your own research and decide and determine if you could support, you know, groups and situations and theories like this, knowing everything that finding out all the information you can, and with all the information in front of you, decide and determine whether or not this is something you get behind. And if you choose to be transgender, like you said, as an adult, that's your choice. Absolutely, is your choice. I think that they should make them on your driver's license where it tells your sex.
Mm-hmm.
I think their sex should be just trans on their ID.
Well, you need to know the sex for certain things, especially if you're actually I don't know if that affects it, but I think like if you're like an organ donor or something, it may have something to do with it.
I don't think if an organ donor, I think it doesn't matter if you're donating organs, whether your organs from a male can't go into a female.
Well, maybe we make it like M/T, something like that. I don't know. I mean, I don't
I
know
think it should
exactly.
just be a T. Think about this. You meet some chick that you think's a chick and she's hot as fuck. Check her ID and it says W and it really was an M. And you plan on having kids and then you don't have no kids, but you don't know about her past. She never tells you she was trans.
Mm.
You find out you're gay now and you're like, mind blown.
I think that should be considered rape. If she does that, I think that should be considered rape because
No,
it's
I think
rape.
I think that
No. Listen to me. It's rape under a false pretense. In the same way that if you lie, and I don't know if that's actually like official or they still
it's
keep
in
pushing it.
Australia
Yeah, like if you say that you're like a doctor or something, and then you have
and
sex
you're a
with a
subway
girl,
artist.
and she finds out that you're not, yep, that is considered rape because it's sex under a false pretense.
Yeah, I think that should be true. That's
It's
true.
interesting, man. There's a heck of a lot that we could dive into further. I would really like to at some point potentially have somebody come on that um, is transgender, maybe one that's successful and maybe one that is detransitioned. I mean, that would be an entire second series. But I think at least shedding light right now, this has been a great documentary that we've done, an expose, as you will, just to start spurring the question. And we don't have an issue with transgender people, but we have an issue with the basis of where that gender theory, sexual evolution, all of that came from, queer theory as well. So I just have to say this was a heavy one. It's an interesting one. And I hope it sparks a lot of thoughts in people.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Well, with that said, what's your closing thoughts, HUDS?
Don't have much more than that. I'm really glad that you were on this journey with me. I know that it is tough to swallow some of these stories and to understand that this is actually what went on. But we need to know these things. I don't want history to repeat itself. If we ignore this, then who knows? Soon enough in the future, we may do more human experiments like this. And I don't want to see any more lives lost than the ones lost of the Ryman brothers, and any more lost outside of that we don't even know of because of getting the improper surgeries at improper ages. I don't want people to go through the psychological pain of thinking they're one way when they just were uncomfortable in their skin at the time and then they later regret it. I don't want people to chop off their Johnson and then later on regret it because you can't do that back. The nerve endings are mostly gone. I don't want people to suffer pain. I want people to live a free and happy life in the way that they want to, but I don't want them to suffer pain like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I want people to be well informed and I want them to know the truth of what they're going into before they go into it. And I think that's the most important thing here is that the truth was withheld in so many cases revolving all this that that it ruined a lot of people's lives at the end of the day. So, they're saying the truth will set you free. It's not always good. It's not always going to make you feel better, but you're free. And I think that's what's important here. Letting the truth out allows people to get free.
I'm glad that we were able to do something a little bit more professional like this, and I'd love to do some things like this in the future. So if you guys have any ideas, definitely drop them down below and let us know what you think about this. You know, we always talk about like men's self-improvement and like dating, things like that, but sometimes it's good to touch on other topics. So love it, hate it, let us know, and we'll keep things coming.
Yep.
Alrighty.
Doses.